Imagine opening an old chest, the wood splintered by salt and time, the iron hinges rusted to near silence. Inside, instead of gold coins or silver chalices, you find something far more dangerous: words. Ink faded, paper yellowed, the handwriting hurried and uneven, but unmistakably human. A pirate's own voice, reaching across centuries, not in myth, not in legend, but in letters. Letters that tell of storms, betrayals, fleeting moments of joy, and the constant shadow of the noose. These are not the romanticized speeches of Hollywood, nor the exaggerated ballads sung in taverns. These are raw, unfiltered messages from men who knew they might never see another sunrise. And tonight, you will hear them. What is it about a letter that makes it so haunting? Words spoken vanish into air, but words written stay. They travel. They survive shipwrecks, wars, and centuries of silence. And when they are finally read, it feels like eavesdropping on ghosts. Pirates, who are usually painted as caricatures with parrots and eye patches, suddenly became startlingly real. They laughed, they feared, they doubted, they confessed, and sometimes they begged. Take, for example, one surviving letter from the crew of Captain William Kidd, written not long before his capture. The ink trembles with desperation as the sailors beg the authorities for mercy, claiming they were forced into piracy by their captain. "We are no villains," one line insists, "but poor men ensnared by fate." Can you imagine the shaking hand that wrote those words? Men who once roared over cannons, now reduced to pleading with ink, knowing full well that the rope was already being prepared for their necks. It is one thing to read about pirates as criminals. It is another to see them trying to rewrite their own story in the final hours. And yet, not all letters were apologies. Some were warnings, edged with venom and fire. One of the most chilling fragments comes from a note left nailed to a mast of a captured vessel by the crew of Bartholomew Roberts, better known as Black Bart. Instead of taking the ship, they abandoned it, leaving behind a message soaked in mockery: "The seas belong to us, and to us alone." Imagine being the next crew who discovered that note, the salt wind flicking its corners, a silent declaration that no law but theirs existed in those waters. That is not a plea. That is a proclamation of power, a reminder that ink could terrify just as much as steel. There is another letter, almost tender in tone, from a pirate known as Charles Vane. To his lover onshore, he wrote of longing, of sleepless nights, of the sound of waves that reminded him of her voice. But hidden between those gentle lines is a confession. He feared mutiny. "They look upon me as if I am already buried," he wrote. "I see it in their eyes when I give an order." Can you feel the knife of paranoia behind his words? A pirate feared the hangman, yes, but sometimes he feared his own crew more. And in that ink, we see not just a captain, but a man who knew that love could be snuffed out by betrayal at any moment. The remarkable thing about these writings is not just what they say, but what they don't. Notice how often death lingers between the lines, rarely spoken outright, but always implied. A line about missing home becomes more poignant when you realize the writer never returned. A promise of riches to a wife becomes tragic when the ship went down a week later. A playful insult to a friend becomes a ghost's last joke. When you read a pirate's letter, you are not just reading history, you are reading a tombstone that speaks. But let us not Imagine all pirates wrote their letters with trembling hands. Some wielded words like weapons. Blackbeard himself, though few of his writings survive, was said to dictate letters to merchants and colonial governors dripping with menace. One infamous note demanded supplies under threat of fire and steel, ending with the chilling signature, "From hell." Even if the words themselves are lost, the fear they inspired was very real. To receive such a letter was to know you were being hunted and that your choices were quickly narrowing to surrender or death. And what of the letters never meant to be read? Messages tucked secretly, carried by trusted hands, hidden in hems of clothing or the folds of a Bible. Some of these were intercepted, revealing plots of desertion, alliances between rival crews, or betrayals waiting to be sprung. One captured letter from a pirate in the Caribbean to his brother in London reads almost innocently at first, describing the warm air and plentiful rum. But in a coded phrase, the harvest grows thicker each tide. Authorities later realized it referred to the number of merchant ships ripe for plundering. What sounds like poetry was in fact strategy. Pirates disguised treachery in ink the way they disguised weapons under cloaks. What strikes hardest, though, is the humanity of it all. We think of pirates as monsters or as legends, but in these fragile pages we glimpse them as men and women who lived under unbearable pressure. They stole, they killed, they drank, yes, but they also wrote. They wrote because some part of them still wanted to be understood, still wanted to be remembered, not just as a skull on a flag, but as a person with a beating heart and a trembling hand. Close your eyes and imagine a storm at sea. The mast groaning, sails ripping, waves crashing high as houses. Amid this chaos, a man sits hunched over a scrap of paper, trying to keep ink from running in the spray. He knows the ship may not survive the night. He knows he may never see land again, and still he writes. Not to record glory, not to boast of treasure, but to leave behind a trace of himself, because he knows that while gold sinks, words float. That is why these letters matter. Not because they tell us what pirates did, but because they tell us what pirates felt. Fear, desire, defiance, love, they cut through the centuries like a knife, refusing to be silenced. And as we explore more of them, you will discover not only the secrets of the sea, but the secrets of the soul that only ink can preserve. So the next time you think of pirates, do not think first of parrots or treasure maps. Think of a letter, a folded piece of paper that once carried the breath of a dying man or the pride of a triumphant one across oceans. Because in the end, what remains is not the roar of cannon fire or the glitter of stolen gold. It is words, fragile and immortal, whispering across time. As we reach the final letters in this collection, a pattern emerges. Pirates wrote not only to communicate, but to assert their existence. In a world that sought to erase them, these letters are declarations, proof that they lived, loved, feared, and schemed. One letter, written by a pirate named Anne Bonny to a trusted confidant, captures this sense of defiance. She writes about her narrow escape from capture, the thrill of a midnight raid, and then, almost casually, hints at the bonds she formed with her crew. The sea has no masters but herself, she declares, and I bow only to her moods. The audacity and poetic cadence of her words leave a lasting impression, reminding us that pirates often lived more vividly than those who judged them from afar. Another striking letter from the notorious pirate Blackbeard mixes bravado with vulnerability. Addressed to an associate in Charleston, it details his strategy for blockade and intimidation. Yet, beneath the scheming lies an acknowledgement of mortality. I have danced with death many times, and still she waits for me at every turn. Blackbeard's correspondence reveals the calculated risk behind every pirate act. The awareness that freedom came with a constant shadow. Through his letters, one can trace the tension between fear and ambition, a psychological battle as intense as any cannonade. These letters also show that pirates were aware of their own myth-making. Many writers reflect on how stories of their deeds would be interpreted, exaggerated, or vilified. In one letter, a pirate remarks that the legends of his cruelty have grown beyond the reality, and he muses on the irony of being feared far more than he could ever inspire fear. This self-consciousness adds another layer to the narrative. Pirates were participants in their own legend, shaping perception through words as well as action. Their letters were instruments of reputation, management, propaganda, and storytelling. In some cases, letters were used to leave instructions for posterity. A pirate captain might dictate how his treasure should be divided in the event of death, or how his ship should be handled. These writings often reveal a preoccupation with fairness and legacy, contradicting the image of pirates as entirely lawless. One letter lists each crew member and their share of gold, peppered with personal remarks, warnings, and even jokes. Through this, we see a community governed by informal law, accountability, and interpersonal bonds, all maintained through the written word. But perhaps the most compelling letters are those that reveal inner turmoil. Many pirates wrote about longing for home, family, and the life they had left behind. One young sailor confesses to missing his mother's cooking, the warmth of a hearth, and the simple pleasure of sleeping without fear of cannon fire. These confessions humanize pirates, showing that beneath the veneer of toughness and brutality were men and women who yearned for ordinary comforts. Letters capture this duality, the fierce independence of the pirate and the deep human need for connection. Pirate letters also offer insight into morality and justice among outlaws. Disputes over stolen goods, punishments for disobedience, and the enforcement of codes are documented with precision. One letter recounts a trial aboard a ship where accusations are weighed, witnesses questioned, and sentences carried out. The writer emphasizes fairness, adherence to agreed rules, and consequences for betrayal. It is a stark reminder that even in lawless societies, structure and ethics, however unconventional, emerge naturally. The letters are rich with tactical detail, too. Many describe maneuvers, wind patterns, and battle strategies, providing a glimpse into the practical knowledge required to navigate and survive at sea. One letter instructs a crew on how to disguise a ship with false colors, evade patrols, and launch a surprise attack at dawn. Another explains the timing of cannon fire relative to the wind and tides. Through these writings, we understand that piracy was not just a matter of chance. It was a discipline, a blend of observation, planning, and daring execution. Despite the focus on survival, danger, and strategy, humor and personality shine through. Pirates often used letters to tease one another, recount absurd mishaps, or mock authority. One sailor describes a chase where his captain fell overboard, followed by a flood of sarcastic comments about his swimming skills. Such humor served as a pressure valve, a way to cope with stress and uncertainty. These moments make the letters relatable, bridging centuries, reminding us that laughter and camaraderie persist even in extreme circumstances. Some letters were love letters, delicate and vulnerable, contrasting sharply with the violence of pirate life. A pirate writes to a lover in England, describing the beauty of the sunrise over the Caribbean, confessing longing and fear, and promising to return if fate allows. These tender moments show that pirates, often imagined solely as brutal marauders, had complex emotional lives. They loved, they feared, they hoped, and they documented it, leaving traces that endure. Interestingly, pirate letters sometimes reveal the human cost of freedom. One letter tells the story of a sailor who lost friends to storms, battle, and disease, grappling with grief and guilt. "Each man I bury is a part of my soul," he writes, "and yet I sail on, for the sea will not wait." Such passages convey the harsh truth of pirate existence. Liberty came at immense cost, and each choice carried consequences that reverberated long after the ink dried. As we reflect on the entirety of these writings, a theme emerges. Pirates lived in extremes, and their letters were mirrors of that intensity. Joy and fear, cruelty and kindness, strategy and improvisation, longing and defiance all coexist on the page. These letters are not mere artifacts. They are human testimonies, evidence that behind every legend was a real person navigating uncertainty, grappling with morality and seeking meaning in a turbulent world. In the end, pirate letters teach us about the universality of human experience. Despite the fantastical reputation of pirates, their hopes, fears, humor, and wisdom resonate across time. They remind us that even in the most lawless, dangerous, and romanticized lives, people grappled with choices, consequences, and the desire to be remembered. Through their words, pirates reach across centuries to speak directly to us, offering insight, caution, and a spark of imagination. So, the next time you think of pirates, remember that beyond the myths of treasure and terror lies a world captured in letters raw, intimate, and profoundly human. These letters are more than history. They are voices, and they endure. If you want to continue uncovering hidden stories like these, make sure to subscribe. Not all pirate letters were born in storms or at the edge of death. Some were written during the long stretches of calm when the sea itself seemed to sleep. Days without wind, sails hanging limp, the sun burning down like a judgment. In those still hours, the mind wandered. Pirates who could neither advance nor retreat picked up quills and scratched their thoughts into paper. One such letter, recovered from the wreck of a sloop near the Bahamas, speaks almost like a diary entry. The anonymous pirate writes of boredom, of endless card games, of the stink of fish drying on deck. He complains that rum has run out, that tempers flare easily, that one man nearly killed another over a dice throw. Then, almost as an afterthought, he describes a punishment, a man whipped until his back split open for stealing from the common pot. The letter shifts from mundane annoyance to horror in a single sentence, a reminder that even in silence, violence was always just beneath the surface. We imagine pirates always in motion, raiding, chasing, fleeing. But their letters reveal another truth. Most of their lives were spent waiting for a prize ship, waiting for a favorable wind, waiting for the courage to act. And in that waiting, the ink became a way to release the pressure, a way to talk to themselves, to God, to anyone who might one day read the words. In this sense, a pirate's letter was not just communication, it was confession. But what exactly did they confess? One striking example comes from a French buccaneer known only as La Roche. His letter, discovered in an archive in Marseille, begins with a list of spoils: tobacco, sugar, and coin. Yet as it unfolds, the tone darkens. He writes of nightmares, of seeing the faces of men he killed, staring at him in the waves. They will not drown, he writes, they rise again when I close my eyes. This is not the image of a fearless rogue. This is the voice of a haunted man, trapped not by chains, but by memory. And it makes us ask, how many pirates laughed on deck, only to crumble when alone with a piece of paper and their ghosts? Sometimes the letters take us even deeper into the strange democracy of the pirate world. Unlike naval ships, where captains ruled with iron authority, pirate crews often voted on decisions where to sail, who to attack, even whether a captain should remain in command. In one surviving letter from the crew of Samuel Bellamy, better known as Black Sam, the sailors describe the vote to elect him captain. The words are sharp, proud. We choose no tyrant. He is one of us, and by our hands he stands. Imagine the power of those words to a poor sailor who had once been flogged under Navy command. For him, to write such a line was to declare freedom, not just with his sword, but with his pen. That is the pirate code in action, preserved in ink. Yet, freedom came at a price. Another letter, written by a sailor who deserted the Royal Navy for piracy, captures the conflict perfectly. He tells his brother, I am free now, free as the gulls, and no man calls me dog. But then he admits he has not slept well in weeks. He knows he is hunted. He knows the gallows stand waiting. He knows that every coin he spends carries the stain of death. I would rather be a free man for a year, he concludes, than a slave for a lifetime. It is a brutal equation, but it was the calculation many men made. And in those words, you can feel both the thrill and the doom pressing in. Not all letters were intended for family or crew. Some were written for posterity, for history itself. There is a famous example attributed to the pirate, Stede Bonnet, the so-called gentleman pirate. Educated and wealthy before he turned rogue, Bonnet wrote with a flowery style, almost literary. In one of his letters, he reflects on why he left comfort for chaos. I sought in the waves what I could not find in the halls of men. For in society I was caged, but in the tempest I found myself a master. Whether he believed this fully or wrote it to justify his fall, the words ring with strange poetry. A man who abandoned estates for blood still needed to dress his choice in dignity. His pen tried to save what his sword had already destroyed. And then there are the letters that read like riddles, their meaning slipping between lines. One fragment from an Irish pirate mentions the Silver Road and the three-headed serpent, as if these were clues known only to his crew. Historians puzzle over them, debating whether they referred to hidden routes, coded names for enemy ships, or perhaps secret burial sites of treasure. To us, it feels like being handed half a map with the other half burned away. You can sense the thrill of discovery, but also the frustration of knowing the full truth may never be revealed. That, in itself, is the power of these writings. They keep the mystery alive. But what of the letters that were never finished? There are several, recovered from shipwrecks or scattered archives, where the ink breaks off mid-sentence, as if interrupted by cannon fire, mutiny, or storm. One, written in a careful hand, ends with the words, "If we should meet again," and nothing more. No signature, no farewell, just silence. To read such a fragment is like hearing a voice cut off in mid-breath. You lean forward, straining to hear the rest, but it never comes. These unfinished letters are perhaps the most honest of all, because they reflect the true life of a pirate, always at risk of being cut short. And sometimes, the most chilling letters are not from pirates themselves, but from those who faced them. Captains of merchant vessels who survived attacks often wrote home, describing the horrors they witnessed. One merchant captain wrote of Blackbeard's crew, "They laughed as they lit the fuses in their beards, as if the devil himself played amongst them. Never have I seen men so careless of their souls." Imagine being the recipient of that letter, reading the terror soaked into every line. To that captain, pirates were not just criminals, they were demons made flesh. Yet, when you place that account beside a pirate's own letter, you see two realities colliding. One man writes of his hunger for freedom, the other writes of his fear of monsters. And both are telling the truth. But perhaps the most surprising letters are those of gratitude. Yes, gratitude. In a captured correspondence from a pirate to a colonial governor, the pirate thanks the governor for turning a blind eye, for allowing certain trades to continue. The letter is careful, almost deferential, but the meaning is clear. Corruption bound the land and sea together. Pirates were not always outsiders. Sometimes they were woven directly into the systems of power. And those letters, more than any skull and crossbones flag, reveal the uncomfortable truth. Piracy was not just rebellion, it was business. Think for a moment about what it means to hold one of these letters in your hand. The paper fragile, the ink faded, the words trembling but alive. This is not treasure in the usual sense. It will not shine in a chest. It will not buy rum or powder. And yet, it is infinitely more valuable because it carries something gold never could, a human voice. Gold tells us nothing, but ink tells us everything, and here lies the paradox. Pirates chased fortune across oceans, yet the truest wealth they left behind was not coin, but confession. Their words, scattered like flotsam, wash ashore in our time, carrying stories more haunting than any ballad. Stories that remind us that the men who flew black flags were not merely villains or heroes, but something far more unsettling, human. The more we dive into pirate letters, the clearer it becomes that they were living document snapshots of survival, cunning, and emotion frozen in ink. One of the most striking examples comes from a letter by William Fly, a pirate whose career lasted barely a year before his capture and execution. In his letter to a fellow crew member, he writes about the exhilaration of the open sea, the thrill of capturing a merchant vessel, and then, almost in the next line, he confesses his fear of capture. "The wind carries both fortune and doom," he scribbles, "and I am never sure which it will deliver to my hands first." There is poetry in that admission, a raw acknowledgement that even the most daring men were at the mercy of nature and fate. Fly's letter, like many others, exposes a paradox central to piracy, the craving for freedom that came hand in hand with constant danger. Each ship was a prison and a kingdom at once. Crew members wrote to loved ones about distant ports or the promise of treasure, but underlying every word was the unspoken risk that tomorrow might not come. Letters preserved these contradictions. The highs and lows compressed into sentences that could barely contain the intensity of life on the edge. Some letters reveal remarkable ingenuity. There is one letter from a pirate captain to his quartermaster, in which he outlines a plan to evade naval patrols, using decoys and false signals. The language is practical, almost mechanical, yet every detail is calculated to mislead, to create a maze of confusion for anyone pursuing them. Reading it, one realizes that piracy was not merely about brute force. It was a game of strategy, intelligence, and improvisation. Every letter could be a tool, a weapon, or a map, depending on who read it and how wisely they interpreted the words. Beyond strategy, letters often capture fleeting moments of camaraderie and humor, moments that the official chronicles of piracy tend to ignore. One crew member jokes about the captain's obsession with clean boots, mocking the absurdity of being meticulous while sailing through storms and skirmishes. Another writes about the crew singing sea shanties that are obscene, hilarious, and bitter all at once. These glimpses humanize pirates, revealing them as flawed, witty, and deeply social creatures. Humor became a lifeline, a way to maintain morale in a world where death could come with the rising tide. Yet, letters are not merely windows into daily life. They are mirrors reflecting the inner conflicts of their writers. Many pirates express doubt, guilt, and longing. One letter from a young pirate, barely 17, confesses a fear that he might be no different from the men he looted and killed. "I wanted freedom," he writes, "but I have become a shadow that strikes without conscience. Will I ever find redemption?" These confessions remind us that piracy was morally complex. It was not a simple matter of good versus evil. It was a constant negotiation between survival, ambition, and conscience. Some pirates used letters to manipulate perception even after their deaths. There are letters that survive because they were deliberately left to mislead authorities or rival crews. A pirate might boast of a raid that never occurred or exaggerate the size of a treasure to provoke envy and confusion. These letters were weapons of influence, a way to control information and shape reality from afar. The act of writing became an extension of the pirate's cunning, a silent battle fought with ink instead of cannonballs. Pirate letters also reveal the social hierarchies aboard ships. The captain's words often carry authority, but so too do letters from trusted lieutenants or quartermasters. Crew members wrote to assert claims, resolve disputes, or secure loyalty. One remarkable letter outlines the division of plunder with meticulous precision, assigning shares to each man according to rank, seniority, and service. In reading it, one sees the fragile structure that held pirate crews together, a mix of meritocracy, negotiation, and mutual dependence. Pirates, contrary to popular imagination, relied heavily on rules and agreements, and letters were one of the ways they enforced them. The emotional resonance of these letters cannot be overstated. They contain longing, regret, pride, and fear, often in the same paragraph. A pirate might describe the beauty of a sunset over the Caribbean, while simultaneously detailing the brutal punishment of a mutinous crew member. The tension between aesthetics and violence mirrors the larger tension of pirate life: freedom shadowed by danger, beauty shadowed by brutality. Letters capture this tension in a way that action-packed chronicles never can, offering an intimate view into the psychology of those who lived outside conventional society. Then there are letters that survive because they were discovered by accident. In the wreck of a pirate ship off the coast of Madagascar, historians found a bundle of letters sealed in oilskin. The contents ranged from mundane personal notes to elaborate descriptions of planned raids. One letter detailed an escape from a heavily armed frigate, complete with diagrams of wind patterns and ship maneuvers. Another was a desperate plea for medical supplies for a sick crew member, written with a vulnerability rarely seen in pirate chronicles. These letters bridge the gap between legend and lived experience, reminding us that the men and women behind the myths were as real as the waves they navigated. The letters also reveal the global networks of piracy. Pirates communicated with contacts in Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Trade, negotiation, intelligence gathering, all were facilitated through correspondence. A letter might carry instructions for acquiring new weapons, recruiting crew, or bribing officials. Reading these documents, one sees piracy not as isolated acts of violence, but as a complex, interconnected system. The sea was the highway, letters were the currency, and survival depended on both. Even when letters are informal, they reveal remarkable attention to detail. One pirate, writing to a friend, describes the appearance of a ship in such vivid terms: its hull, rigging, sails, and flag that a modern reader could almost reconstruct it visually. Another letter catalogues a storm with meteorological precision, noting the wind direction, the force of waves, and the timing of lightning strikes. These letters were records of observation, sometimes scientific in their meticulousness, grounded in the harsh realities of life at sea. Pirate letters also challenge assumptions about literacy and education. Contrary to the stereotype of pirates as unlettered brutes, many were capable writers. They spelled, punctuated, and expressed themselves with clarity and intent. Letters were sometimes drafted and redrafted, showing the care with which words were chosen. Literacy was a tool, and pirates who could write had a significant advantage, whether in strategy, diplomacy, or deception. Perhaps most poignantly, pirate letters remind us that history is preserved in fragments. Each surviving letter is a doorway into a world that has otherwise vanished. We cannot reconstruct every voyage, every raid, every betrayal, but through letters, we catch glimpses of lives lived on the edge of the known world. They allow us to hear voices that would otherwise be silent, to feel the pulse of a world governed by both lawlessness and code. As we read these letters, we begin to understand that piracy was not merely a career, it was a way of life. The words reveal courage, cunning, fear, longing, and loyalty. They capture the beauty of the sea, the violence of battle, and the human need for connection and survival. Through letters, pirates speak to us across centuries, bridging the gap between myth and reality. Even the most ordinary letters could hide extraordinary truths. Take, For instance, a letter discovered in the archives of Port Royal, Jamaica. It was penned by a pirate known only as Thomas Red Hand Malone. At first glance, it seems mundane. He writes to a distant cousin about the weather, the slow decay of sails, the smell of salt and fish. But then, tucked in between complaints about moldy bread and rats gnawing through barrels, he slips a detail that transforms the letter into a revelation, a coded list of ships, ports, and dates. Malone was mapping the Atlantic, and in plain sight, he left a trail of his raids for anyone clever enough to read between the lines. That's the brilliance of pirate. Letters they speak on two levels at once, mundane and dangerous, innocent and complicit. Some pirates used letters as tools of manipulation. A striking example comes from Mary Read, one of the few women known to have sailed under a pirate flag in the early 18th century. Disguised as a man, she wrote letters that appeared to be simple trade, negotiations, or personal notes. Yet, beneath the polite veneer, she threatened entire crews, commanded respect, and preserved secrets that could have cost her life if exposed. Reading her letters, one senses the careful calculation, the balancing act between identity, power, and survival. Every word was armor, every sentence a blade. And it forces us to reconsider the old myths of piracy as purely chaotic. It was structured, cunning, and deadly clever. There are also letters that capture fleeting moments of hope and tenderness, the human element that history often overlooks. One sailor writes to his from the deck of a captured sloop, "I will return with more than gold if I survive the next moon. I carry your name in my heart, and it is the only thing that keeps me from despair when the nights are too black to see the stars." In that short passage, the terror of the sea collides with longing, love, and vulnerability. For a moment, pirates are not raiders, they are men caught in the same currents of emotion that any of us feel, yet danger was never far. Letters often reveal the thin line between life and death. One pirate, writing to his brother after an engagement with the Royal Navy, details the chaos of battle with unnerving calm. "The guns roared like the devil's laughter," he writes. "Men fell, some screaming, some silent. We took what we could and fled, leaving the rest for the sea." Then, almost in passing, he notes a simple, human detail, the loss of a favorite hat. It is jarring, this juxtaposition of trivial concern against the backdrop of slaughter. It reminds us that pirates, like all of us, navigated the absurdity of life and death together. The psychological toll of piracy also emerges in letters. A rare correspondence from Edward Lowe, one of the most feared pirates of his era, offers insight. In a letter to a confidant, he writes of insomnia, paranoia, and visions of his own crew turning against him. "Even my shadow seems to betray me," he notes. These are not words of bravado, they are the private whispers of a man living on the knife's edge. Historians have suggested that piracy was as much a mental burden as a physical one. Letters like Lowe's confirm it. Behind the swaggering image, there were men constantly negotiating fear, loyalty, and survival. And then there are letters that challenge our moral assumptions. One sailor, captured by his own crew for theft, writes a letter begging for mercy. "I have taken too much, but I meant no harm. Let me live, and I will return my share tenfold." His writing is desperate, contrite, almost childlike. Yet, a week later, another letter from the same crew member boasts of a raid that netted triple the coins he had previously stolen. The duality is striking. Pirates could be cruel, self-serving, and ruthless, yet also capable of honor and loyalty in unexpected ways. Letters expose this complexity more vividly than any chronicle of battles or executions ever could. Pirate letters also serve as maps of emotion, revealing connections that were otherwise invisible. Some letters were affectionate, almost tender, written to mothers, wives, or sisters. Others are filled with menace, warning rivals or merchants to comply. The tone, the choice of words, the very handwriting conveys more than the content itself. A trembling hand, a blot of ink, the hurried crossing out of a sentence, all of these speak to the human drama behind the lawlessness. In that sense, every letter is a microcosm of pirate life, a collision of risk, strategy, fear, and desire, penned in private moments that no one else could witness. Not all letters survived because of chance. Some were deliberately preserved. Pirates sometimes kept letters to prove loyalty or claim a share of treasure. There is a fascinating letter from a crewman of Bartholomew Roberts, detailing the division of loot after a particularly profitable raid. The words are methodical, almost bureaucratic. Who received what, who lost what, and who owed whom. It reads more like a ledger than a personal note, yet beneath the surface, it tells a story of order within chaos. Pirates, despite their image, were not purely anarchic. They thrived on rules, contracts, and enforceable agreements. And yet, for every letter that survived, countless more were lost, washed away by storms, burned in fires, or destroyed in desperation. This scarcity makes each surviving piece even more valuable. We hold in our hands fragments of lives lived on the edge, glimpses into moments that would otherwise be invisible to history. A single letter can illuminate the mundane routines, the strategic calculations, and the raw, unfiltered emotions of men and women whose lives were defined by the sea and the sword. Sometimes the letters are cryptic, written in codes or ciphers to prevent unwanted eyes from reading them. These coded letters reveal the sophistication of pirate communication. Some were designed to hide routes, plans, or treasure locations, while others concealed personal secrets or confessions. Historians and cryptographers have spent decades attempting to decode them, and each breakthrough offers a new window into pirate psychology. A letter that might at first seem like nonsense can, with the right key, expose plots, alliances, and betrayals that rival any novel. Even the letters that appear mundane often reveal unexpected intelligence. For example, a pirate writing about a dockside tavern or a market could include subtle observations about trade patterns, military movements, or the strengths of rival crews. Pirates, like modern intelligence agents, collected information wherever they could. A casual note about a shipment of sugar could be the key to planning a raid that would bring in thousands of coins. In this way, letters were not just expressions of thought, they were instruments of power. And yet, for all their strategic value, letters also carried vulnerability. Any pirate who wrote down plans risked exposure. Any expression of doubt or fear could be exploited. And letters sent to distant contacts, family, friends, or merchants could be intercepted. This constant tension between communication and risk adds a layer of suspense to each surviving piece. Reading these letters, we are acutely aware that every word was a gamble. every sentence a step on a tightrope stretched over the unforgiving sea. By examining pirate letters, we also gain insight into the moral universe of the pirate world. Pirates operated on a different set of rules, yet they had ethics, codes, and expectations. Some letters plead for justice, others demand loyalty. Some describe punishment with brutal honesty, while others express relief and gratitude. In reading them, we see a society in miniature with hierarchies, alliances, and disputes. It is a society governed not by law alone, but by the shared understanding of those who lived outside it. And perhaps, most importantly, pirate letters remind us that these men and women were not myths. They were flesh and blood, capable of fear, courage, love, and treachery. The legends we know, the black flags, the buried treasure. The swashbuckling adventures gain depth and dimension when paired with these writings. The letters humanize the myths, showing us the messy, dangerous, and often beautiful lives that history reduced to caricature.